Hello and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we will be going over how to care for a leopard gecko and everything you are going to need in order to provide a great setup for your leopard gecko. My main goal for this video is to cover all of the basic care and setup requirements in order to keep a leopard gecko. Now we will be making future videos which will break down each and every section from within this video and go into a lot more depth. However, for this video, I just want you to have access to all of the main information from within one video. By the end of this video, you should have enough knowledge to provide outstanding care for your leopard gecko. So without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? So to begin with, let's actually talk a bit about leopard geckos. This species can be found across Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and Iran. And they have adapted to live in the arid rockery environments of these regions. Now, leopard geckos can actually live for roughly 15 to 20 years in captivity with the proper care and setup. Now, adult leopard geckos tend to reach around 20 to 25 centimeters in length, which is 8 to 10 inches long. Leopard geckos make great pets, especially for those who are looking to get started within this hobby, because they are generally quite docile, easy to handle, and fairly straightforward to actually care for. So now let's actually teach you how to care for a leopard gecko. To begin with, let's discuss the temperatures and humidity requirements. Your leopard gecko's enclosure should have a hot side and a cold or cool side. This can be achieved by positioning the heat source to one side of the vivarium, which should look something like this. As you can see, I've got the heat lamp to one side of the vivarium, which is my hot end, and then I've got the cold end with no heating source. Now, your ideal temperature range across the whole enclosure should range between 22 degrees Celsius to 32 degrees Celsius, which is 72 Fahrenheit to 90 Fahrenheit. The cool end of your enclosure should range between 22 Celsius to 24 Celsius, which is 72 to 75 Fahrenheit. And your basking spot temperature should reach between 29 to 32 degrees Celsius, which is 85 to 90 Fahrenheit. As for nighttime temperatures, I personally wouldn't let them drop below 18 degrees Celsius, which is 65 Fahrenheit. So be mindful of your temperatures during the night around November to March for my UK viewers. Our nighttime temperatures during those months can be quite harsh and quite cold. So to test your temperatures, I personally would recommend using one of these. Now, this little device is the Exoterra infrared thermometer, and it allows me to test the temperatures anywhere within inside the enclosure and not just one specific spot in the enclosure. Now, these two are two alternatives. The one on the left is a dial thermometer, which will stick onto the inside of the enclosure. The second one, which is the one on the right, is the digital version, which you run a probe in the enclosure and then it will display the temperature on the screen that the sensor is reading. Now let's move on to humidity requirements. Leopard geckos really don't need much humidity. The ideal humidity range would be between 30 to 40%. Now, I do find that if you use an appropriate substrate alongside appropriate heating, the enclosure will naturally sit between this range anyway. Now, you will need to provide an area inside the enclosure that has a humidity range of around 70 to 80%. This is an area that they can go to help them shed off their skin. Now, by providing a hide with something like sphagnum moss inside, allows your gecko to have access to a higher humidity range to help them shed their skin. This is commonly known as a shed box or a moist hide. Now, you will probably find that you'll need to mist the sphagnum moss inside this hide in order to keep it moist, as well as prevent it from drying out. Now, you'll probably find that this is going to be the only area inside your enclosure that you will be misting. For the rest of the enclosure, you probably won't need to mist it at all. Since we're on the topic of hides, let's talk a little bit more about them. Now, as a minimum, I'd recommend you providing 3 hides. One is obviously your moist hide, as we've spoken about, and then one is going to be located on your hot side, and then one is going to be located on your cool side. For example, this is one of our very basic leopard gecko setups. As you can see, we have our hot hide over here, as well as our cool hide over here, and then we also have our moist hide. Now, the enclosure that I just showed you is a very basic juvenile leopard gecko setup. Now, we will actually be making videos where we make all of our leopard gecko enclosures fully bioactive in the future, so keep your eyes open for that. I'm very excited to do those videos. Now, personally, I would recommend you provide more than 3 hides. Leopard geckos do love their hiding areas. They love to be able to move between them, to sleep at different temperatures, as well as to feel safe. So the more hiding areas that you provide for your leopard gecko, the safer your gecko is going to feel. This can be achieved by going out and buying hides and caves which look just like these ones. I find that all of these caves work great for the leopard geckos. They do seem to love to go inside them. There are genuinely so many on the market, so it will just come down to personal preference on which ones you like. But there are other ways to provide hides. For example, you can buy cork bark tubes, which will not only provide a hide, but also gives them something which they can actually climb on top of. I personally really love the cork bark tubes. I also love how they look more natural within inside the enclosure too. Now, there are lots of other ways which you can provide hiding areas for your leopard geckos. For example, you can add foliage through live or fake plants. This will allow your gecko to hide between and behind all of the plant foliage, and is a great way to create depth as well as hiding spots within your enclosure. The other great way to create hides would be by building hides out of natural rocks. I personally think this is a great way to create hides for your leopard gecko, as well as give them something to actually climb on. In addition to this, rocks work extremely well as a basking platform for your geckos to sit on and warm up. This provides them with underbelly heat, which will help with digestion. Now, rocks are also great to use as basking platforms because they retain a lot of heat from the heat lamp. Personally, I think having a natural rock as your basking platform is genuinely one of the best options for a basking platform. Now let's move on to the heating and lighting requirements. For the lighting, I highly recommend you install a UVB kit. UVB has a lot of health benefits for leopard geckos and plays a huge part in their vitamin D3 cycle, which is essential for their bone growth and overall health. It's also enrichment for your geckos and will boost their natural behaviours. So for these reasons on their own, I would highly recommend installing UVB. So this is the UVB kit that I recommend you get. It's the 8 watt 7% T5 UVB kit, and it's made specifically for the leopard geckos. Now, keep in mind that the UVB tubes will only last for roughly 8 to 12 months before you'll need to replace it. Now, if you're using live plants, I would strongly recommend installing one of these, which is the 15 watt Jungle Dawns. This is mainly for your plant growth. It will provide the perfect spectrum to allow your plants to grow, as well as provide your geckos with a day and night cycle alongside your UVB. Even if you're not using live plants, I'd still recommend installing one of these Jungle Dawns because they really do increase the amount of light within inside the enclosure. Now, you're going to want to make sure you run your lighting for roughly 10 to 12 hours a day, and make sure you switch off all lights at night. Talking of which, please make sure you don't install a red light or a blue light for nighttime use. These bulbs are known to be quite disturbing for your geckos. So just make sure that all lights are turned off at night time. Now, before we go over heating, I feel like we need to quickly touch on enclosure sizing, because the size of your enclosure will kind of determine what sort of heating equipment you're going to go for. So for a baby or juvenile leopard gecko, I would recommend you go for a 2 foot by 1.6 foot by 1.6 foot, which will look like this enclosure here. Now, for an adult, as a minimum, I would recommend a 3 foot by 1.6 foot by 1.6 foot. However, personally, I would just go for the 3 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot. Now, you can also obviously go bigger. If you can go for a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot, happy days, go for it. But like I said, the minimum requirement for an adult gecko would be the 3 foot by 1.6 by 1.6. For heating up a 2 foot vivarium, just like this one, I would personally recommend using a heat mat with a mat stat. Now, yes, a heat mat does not simulate the sun. However, for this size enclosure, I personally find it's the best option without the enclosure getting too hot. I have had several people say that they have this size enclosure and they use a heat lamp in it and it just gets constantly too hot, even when they're controlling it on a dimming thermostat. So for that reason, that's why I personally use the heat mat with the mat stat. And again, I only tend to use these for the baby / juveniles. So obviously once they move up to the bigger enclosures, they get a bit of a different sort of heating system. So for the 3 foot enclosures, I would recommend going out and getting yourself a ceramic heat lamp holder. Please make sure it's a ceramic one and not a plastic one. I've had plastic ones melt in the past. So ever since that, I've always made sure to use a ceramic one. On top of that, you're probably going to want to make sure to get yourself a lamp guard, just in case your leopard gecko climbs up and tries to climb on the bulb. It can obviously prevent that from happening. For your daytime basking heat lamp, I would recommend using either a 75 watt incandescent spot lamp, which would look something like this, or you can also use the 75 watt halogens, which should look like this. And for both of these two options, I would highly recommend you getting yourself a dimming thermostat. The thermostat will basically control and regulate the temperature which you set on the device. Now, there is another way of providing heat for your leopard geckos in a 3 foot enclosure, which would be a 50 watt ceramic heater bulb. Now, first of all, if you do go this option, make sure that you buy a pulse stat and not a dimming thermostat. But personally, I've only ever used the 50 watt ceramic heaters for nighttime heating as opposed to a daytime basking bulb. I personally prefer using like the halogen or the incandescent ones because it actually has benefits for my reptiles that I'm providing it to. Whereas like the ceramic heater, it basically works like a heat mat, just in a bulb version. It doesn't really provide much for your gecko other than heat, which is why I'd recommend using a incandescent or halogen over this option. However, obviously that being said, if you are trying to achieve a nighttime ambient temperature, then obviously, yeah, this is going to do the job as well as a heat mat. So now that we have covered the heating, let's move on to the substrate. Now, I'm going to keep this one nice and simple for you. Personally, I'd recommend doing a biomix, which is where you mix the Arcadia Earth Mix Arid along with the leopard gecko bedding, or you can also use the Leo Life, which would look like this. So like I said, you can mix the Earth Mix with either one of these bags or even both of these bags, and it will create a nice bioactive substrate. Now, I have had several people use each of these bags on their own with no issues or problems. So you can also do that too. But personally, I'd recommend doing the mixture because A, it's more natural, but B, you can also plant live plants into it. Now, some people will use something like this, which is the reptile carpet. Personally, I would kind of recommend steering clear from this. It's not very hygienic, and personally, I just would not recommend it. So, like I said, try and steer clear from using that. Now, there are kits available just like this one, which have pretty much everything you're going to need other than the enclosure itself and the substrate. I'll make sure to leave links in my description to all of the products which I have mentioned in this video in case you're looking to get any. So now that we have fully covered the leopard gecko setup, let's talk a little bit about their diet. So leopard geckos are insectivores, which mean they only will eat live insects, which usually consist of feeding locusts, crickets, mealworms, waxworms, and morio worms, even calci worms. I personally will leave a small dish of calcium in their enclosure, which have a few mealworms in, just for if they want to go and eat and you're not around, they can do so. Now, please keep in mind that waxworms and morio worms should only be fed as treats. They are quite addictive for leopard geckos and they are full of fat. So, like I said, just keep this as a nice treat for them. Your main staple one will be locusts. Oh, and they can also eat dubia roaches too. Now, when you are feeding live foods, you're going to want to make sure that you buy the correct size for the size of your gecko. You're also going to want to dust your live food in calcium and multivitamin. This will aid their health and prevent things like MBD. So yeah, that's pretty much everything you need to know in order to get started and become a great leopard gecko keeper. You should now have a better understanding of how to actually care for your leopard gecko, as well as how to provide a great setup. Like I mentioned earlier, I will be breaking down every section from within this video and going into a lot more depth in other videos going forward. So keep your eyes open for them. My main goal for this video was that I wanted everyone to have access to all of the useful information from within one video, which is why I decided to put this video together. But yeah, that's pretty much it for today's video, guys. I hope that you learned something new and I hope that you enjoyed my video. If you did, maybe consider subscribing. We've got a lot of content lined up for the future of this channel. If you did like this video, please feel free to drop us a like. Also, if there's anything from within my video that you want me to go into more depth on specifically, let me know in the comments. I'd love to be able to make videos around those. In addition to that, if there's something that I didn't cover in this video, again, let me know in the comments. I'd love to be able to make videos on it. So yeah, thanks again for watching and I shall see you in my next video. See ya!